So I was watching Ryan Johnson's new show, Poker Face, which is fantastic fun. I was on episode 5 at about 45 minutes in, and I thought I spotted something strange. See if you can spot it. You see it? A bizarre floating handle waiting to lock into its match, like that short-lived TikTok trend. I was very excited to see this because it's always a pain to explain to people what I do for a living, which is, in part, visual effects compositing. And to explain what's happening here and why it happened, you need to know what that is. Most people know what visual effects are. You think of VFX breakdowns from Marvel movies where superheroes are put into crazy scenes, and that's all correct. But what most people don't realize is the vast majority of compositing work is utilized for mundane tasks like removing exit signs from backgrounds, getting rid of cables and wires, and removing crew members or their shadows that accidentally peek into the shot. So the compositing part of visual effects is essentially Photoshop in motion. There are multiple programs for this, but I suspect this was an After Effects project. See, After Effects uses layered compositing, which means it has a stack of layers, which we call, get ready for it, a layer stack. This is important because, as you can see, some of these layers don't become visible until the moment they're needed. You trim the layer often to the precise frame it needs to appear so that as the clip plays, it turns on at the right time. With cleanup compositing, you're almost always making a clean plate and adding it back on top of the clip. But of course, if there's movement in the shot, you need to make your plate match the movement. This process is called tracking. And if you're fortunate, the program can do the work for you. The issue is, when you're working with massive file sizes, you want to only do the work you need to, because all these processes can take a long time. So when you track, you generally try to track the briefest amount of time you think you can get away with. When everything is working correctly, the layer starts when it needs to start, with its movements tracked, how it needs to be tracked, and no one knows the difference. But what happens in this line of work, like with every other job, things can get overwhelming. With a lot to keep track of, or if you're rushed, or a last-second change means you might need to slide some layers around and you forget to reclip them. And what you get is what happens in this poker face shot. It should have been clipped here, but likely due to some hasty adjustments, was extended back to here, where there's no tracking data created. And therefore, it pops on early and sits, awaiting that moment that it had been taught to move. And once it hits that moment, seamlessly glides through the footage unnoticed, replacing the handle. And that leads us to the remaining question, which is perfectly summarized by the conceit of the show.
I only know if something is alive. The real trick of it is to figure out why.
Why replace this little part of the handle? My initial guess was perhaps there was something or someone helping the door swing all the way open in that last moment. But that seems unnecessary, and the motion of the door is too smooth. And I don't think they erased anything behind the door because the light seems too accurate and strange to have been rebuilt by hand. Notice how the glassy reflections cause the light to shimmer in a peculiar way as the door opens. If it had been replaced, likely the area would just remain a flat color, because who cares? But the biggest problem is the only area being covered is the handle. If someone was reaching across and grabbing the handle, they'd need to cover up the part of the door that the arm would be extending across. Granted, there could be other cover-ups that we just aren't seeing because they were correctly trimmed layers and therefore invisible, but that still doesn't feel right. My second guess was that maybe there was crew visible in the reflection of the handle, but that would be so tiny and distorted, I can't imagine it would be worth farming out this job for such a microscopic alteration. I haven't had a chance to commiserate with other compositors on this, so I'd be curious what other people think. But my final guess is super boring, but I think is the most likely. And that is simply that there was probably a light just off camera, and as the door is swinging open for maybe like 3 frames, the handle caught the light and created a glint or a flash that felt conspicuously unnatural in the scene, or perhaps just distracting. That explains why it's just the handle being replaced. Regardless, this is the sort of tiny oversight that happens all the time in my world, and these small errors that sneak through to the final product keep me up at night. So it's fun to see someone else's mistake make it all the way through all the eyeballs that likely looked it over on such a AAA show. A lot of times I don't even know the name of the show or project the shot I'm working on comes from, so it also warms my heart that possibly this compositor didn't even know they're working on Poker Face, since the main character isn't even in the shot, and so, unlike me, they can rest easy, believing they completed a job well done. When in fact, their layer wasn't trimmed properly, and so they made the tiny thing they were trying to hide 1,000,000 times worse. If you like this, please look at my other videos on this channel, which are longer, elaborate essays on weird movies that act as jumping off points to investigate all sorts of strange topics, like how filmmakers enjoy having unaware women in bathtubs with ominous things creeping between their legs, or the porno chic era, where Deep Throat could be the 5th highest earning box office movie of 1972, just below Deliverance. Seriously, that happened. or how Tom Hanks inadvertently contributed to the Satanic Panic in his kinda sorta based on a true story movie about Dungeons and Dragons and talking birds.
Birds can't talk.
I'm polishing off episode 3, which is about the director of Scarface and Mission Impossible and whether his films have declined as he's gotten older. It's funny and sad, which is my favorite combo, and I can't wait to release it.